Hello, this is Jake Freeman, and this is the history of the Chinese Communist Party. Development of Mao's ideology. Mao's ideology, or Maoism, is a communist theory that Mao wrote after being influenced by Marx. It was similar in ways to Soviet communism, as it hoped to create a classless society, but it differed in one significant way. It was a revolution from the bottom up. By persuading and educating the peasant masses about communism, Mao easily spread it across the population. As it fought for land reform, it was well received by the poor peasants. It was also loved for its nationalistic ideals, which proved effective in winning over the population when Mao and his communists were seen as a beacon of hope against the Japanese invaders. One final important point to his ideology was its iconoclastic views on Confucianism. When the Manchu dynasty fell in 1911, it marked the final failure of Confucian morals, which also made these morals synonymous with political conservatism amongst the Chinese intellectuals. GMD tactics. The GMD began their extermination campaigns in 1930, and they lasted for 4 years. The survivors of the massacres that the GMD began to wipe out the communists with were the civilians that Jiang saw as more threatening than the warlords and bandits. And so, using his armies that always outnumbered those of the CCP, he blundered into the mountainside, attempting to squash any remaining communists. However, for the first 4 parts of these campaigns, Mao had always countered the guerrilla tactics with which, other than killing over 1 million peasants, meant that the GMD could never really achieve any success. However, Hans von Seeckt, a German general, introduced a new method that would enable the GMD to slowly starve the CCP of both food and weapons. The troops were to completely surround the CCP and advance very slowly, all the while building concrete houses, digging trenches, and setting up barbed wire to impede Mao's guerrilla tactics. This strategy proved very successful, and the communists lost over 60,000 troops and over half their territory. Mao's tactics. Mao set up base areas that he used to educate and introduce the peasants to communist ideology, which he hoped would make them more accepting of the taxes and justice system used by the CCP. One of his 8 rules of the 8th Route Army was that everyone was to be treated with respect, a very powerful idea that garnered support from the peasants. From this base area, more CCP officers would spread across the countryside, repeating the process and cutting off the cities from each other. Mao used the peasants' knowledge of the terrain to form hit-and-run tactics, which was part of his plan on defending the new bases. By being drawn into the hostile areas, the GMD were opening themselves to attacks from the CCP who employed guerrilla tactics. Even when the GMD decided on massacres of entire areas, they just drove the population further against them. More bases were constructed around these base areas to improve the fighting of the CCP. Eventually, Mao would no longer be forced to attack just through means of guerrilla tactics, as his army swelled up immensely as his propaganda spread across the population. Soon guerrilla units began forming army units, which would combine into a conventional army, eventually bringing them to victory at the end of the second phase of the war. Communist tactics. During the majority of the extermination campaign that Chiang Kai-shek led against communists, the Red Army would use guerrilla tactics to lure the GMD forces into territory familiar with them by using the peasants, before picking away at them. This became incredibly unpopular amongst the peasants, as thousands of them were being sacrificed. And so, during the final part of the campaign, Otto Braun denounced Mao's tactics, and instead began instigating his own. He urged the Red Army to fight head-on with the Kuomintang in pitched battles, abandoning the guerrilla tactics they had used earlier. This came at heavy costs, however, with thousands being lost in each battle, who weren't easily replaced due to the blockades surrounding them. Eventually, Mao suggested they try to break through the line and escape, but Otto suggested to choose to retreat instead, hoping to escape to the communist base on the Hunan-Hubei border, which led to history's other great escape, the Long March. The Long March began on the 19th of October, when the CCP broke through the lines of the GMD forces. The plan was instigated by Otto Braun, who was a Russian agent that had been sent to aid the CCP. The march started out with 87,000 people, carried typewriters, furniture, printing presses, 33,000 guns, and over 2 million cartridges of ammunition. The first step of the Long March had the CCP break through the blockhouses that the GMD had built during their encirclement campaign and cross the Xiang River. This took 40 days and led to the death of over 50,000 of the escapees. Mao heavily criticized this part of the escape, as the communists were led into the river in one single line, making them sitting ducks for the GMD. The Zun New Communists. By January of the next year, the numbers had dwindled even lower to roughly 30,000 people. With discontent over the leadership of the political group common amongst the people, it was decided that a conference, which would last from the 15th to the 17th, was to be held amongst the Politburo. And so they chose to capture the second largest city in the Guizhou province, Zhongyi. Once Bogu, the Secretary General of the CCP, and Cao Enlai, first Premier, had given their reports, Mao gave an impassioned speech detailing their failures, along with those of Otto Braun. By the end of the conference, Mao's criticism was supported by several other members, including Cao Enlai. So it was decided that Bogu and Otto Braun were to be demoted, and Mao would become a part of the Politburo, beginning his journey to power. The Looting Bridge. Because the Looting Bridge was the only way to cross the Dauli River, the GMD would not have been able to destroy it, without raising public outcry from the many villages that used it. So when the Red Army vanguard reached the crossing on May 29, 1935, they discovered that the GMD had removed its blanket. There are many versions told of the crossing. One was that 22 men using rifles and ammo were able to secure the bridge. Another tells of men using only grenades that were lobbed at machine gunners. And the final, most outrageous story is that some brave soldiers lay down on the bridge, acting as planks, allowing for the other soldiers to cross it and beat the GMD forces. Whichever one is true, this crossing inspired many members of the GMD to actually swap sides. The union of the three armies. Finally, in October 1935, Mao and his Red Army reached the Soviet base that had been established in northern Shaanxi by other communist forces that were led by Louis Zedong, Gao Gang, and Hu Haidong. The 2nd and 4th Red Army soon reached Shaanxi on the 22nd of October, signaling the end of the Long March and the union of the three armies. Unfortunately, the travel had taken its toll on the army, and only 8,000 from the original 87 or so thousand made it there alive. In November, Mao became the chairman of the Military Commission, marking his position as the preeminent leader of the party, with Su in second command. Foreign powers. The Americans supported the GMD from the very beginning of the war. Despite war in Europe, America gave Chiang almost $3 billion worth of aid and supplies. The USA also helped physically, as they transported GMD troops by air and sea to the north of China. The Soviets did not lend aid to the CCP in the way that the GMD were given aid by the Americans. At the beginning, during the encirclement campaign, Comintern involvement had led to near loss. However, Mao ousted the Soviet supporters from his campaign, leading Stalin to believe that he would not be able to overcome the GMD. You might ask, how were the communists able to survive? Well, the strength of the communists. The CCP were able to effectively use guerrilla warfare against not only Jiang and his GMD forces, but against the invading Japanese forces as well. They'd been immensely popular amongst the peasants. The PLA was brilliantly led by Lin Bao, who was able to change it from a guerrilla fighting clan to a regular army. They were able to capture many enemy weapons and even experienced nationalist defectors to swell their ranks, and strengthen them immensely. They behaved immaculately amongst the people as well, gaining